There are a number of hidden zippers in these jackets. Now, what are these for, Betsy? They can't be for, is it for mad money?
Well, it depends on where they're placed. They can be wherever you want them.
Uh-huh.
You know, for the pockets so that no snow gets into it, the zipper holding the hood in because it's easier to put the hood on and off with the zipper than it is with the snaps. Then there's zippers up the sides so that the jacket will fit tightly around the hips, keeping that straight, sleek look that it should have. And very often you'll find a zipper hidden in the arm.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You'll excuse the fact that I'm out of breath, but about 10 or 15 minutes ago, a tragic thing, from all indications at this point, has happened in the city of Dallas. Let me quote to you this. And you'll excuse me if I am out of breath. A bulletin, this is from the United Press, from Dallas. President Kennedy and Governor John Connally have been cut down by assassins' bullets in downtown Dallas. They were riding in an open automobile when the shots were fired. The president, his limp body carried in the arms of his wife, Jacqueline, has rushed to Parkland Hospital. And if you'll excuse me if I give some directions and we talk about what we're going to do here for the next few minutes, but Bobby, let's tape this, if you please, particularly the interview with the eyewitness people. It is being taped good. Here's a piece of copy that was rushed to me and was torn off from the United Press in Dallas. President Kennedy has been shot in Dallas, Texas. He was shot as his motorcade left downtown Dallas. Mrs. Kennedy jumped up and grabbed the president. She cried out.
Good evening, my fellow American sobers. It's come to my attention that very few of us actually understand and know exactly what it is the Central Intelligence Agency is truly designed and created for. What exactly is this branch of the U.S. federal government? What exactly is their purpose? Clandestine operations? Secret, covert military initiatives? What exactly is the CIA up to? Many of you probably falsely believe the CIA is intended to protect national security interests, but many of you would be mistaken. What this branch of the government is designed to protect is, in fact, the business and financial interests of what is important to the United States. It's all about the money. And as we continue to fight and pray for peace, these warmongers, they fight for war. It would appear that this rogue agency's sole existence is to fund and fuel the American propaganda and war machine. Ask not what the CIA can do for you, but what can you do for the CIA? And over the last 62 years, it has become abundantly clear that I would still be here, Dr. Seuss, had I not threatened to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the wind.
Let's go. Alcohol.
All right. Welcome back, my fellow American sobers, to another episode of Sobering Stories with me, President Petrovsky. If you're new to the channel, thank you so much for clicking on that thumbnail. I spent a lot of time making those, so thanks for giving me a chance. If you are a returning subscriber, check and make sure that you've hit the notification bell and that you're actually still subscribed because, well, I've had tons of people still telling me that they aren't subscribed to my channel, even though they thought they were, and that they never see my videos pop up on their feed. But YouTube support has kindly told me to tell you that that's what you got to do, I guess. Last week, we talked about Marilyn Monroe, her connection to the Kennedys, her crazy story, and what made her such an icon. And since JFK was officially assassinated 62 years ago, as of the 22nd, it seemed right to split up the two episodes over the week that happened. So this week I wanted to talk about John Jack Fitzgerald Kennedy. Even if you are someone who subscribes to the mainstream media and refuses to entertain any conspiracy theories whatsoever, you've likely heard of at least three main ones. There's, of course, what happened on September 11th. We've got the Jeffrey Epstein saga still going on. And, of course, the assassination of JFK. And if we go back to grade school talking about fractions, and we look for our lowest common denominator, linking all three of these major cases, what do we end up with? Exactly, a three-letter agency, the CIA. But if the goal of this agency is protecting our national security, why are they always involved in these national tragedies? One of the things I've been most excited about when it comes to the channel is noticing patterns and consistencies week after week between each and every one of these stories. But this week was extra exciting for me because this story almost perfectly comes along as like a chapter 2 to my Titanic video. And no, you don't necessarily have to watch that video before this one, but I would recommend it. We discussed the formation of a secret society whose sole purpose was to help the U.S. establish a Federal Reserve banking system, which could ultimately be funded through private means, allowing foreign investors, people like the Rothschilds, people like J.P. Morgan, people who had some sort of financial stake in lending money to the U.S. government, essentially keeping the U.S. government in debt to these private investors. And we lost the gold standard, so no longer did our money have any value. We also learned about their plot to get the U.S. to enter World War I through the sinking of the Lusitania, which is almost identical to pretty much every single covert black ops operation that the CIA undergoes. They're always creating some sort of catastrophe, some sort of traumatic event to rally support of the U.S. citizens behind whatever their initiative is, usually war. You don't see why? It's because we live in a democracy, and if we go into war, it has to be the public's desire to go into war. We can't just force it on the American people. And if you're interested in seeing how this has literally been a pattern since before the birth of our nation, then I highly recommend you go check out my American Propaganda Machine about September 11th. Super, super interesting history deep dive lesson. Yet again, you don't have to, but it'll make this episode hit twice as hard. And just like with most of my stories, there's going to be some stuff in here that YouTube doesn't want you to see, so I have to blur it out. But if it's stuff that you do want to see, then you should join my membership program, or you can follow me on Patreon. I upload all of my videos to my members and my patrons as soon as I finish editing it. Sometimes there's still mistakes in there even, but that's a way for you to get uncensored early access to the content. And just a quick apology for last week. I think I said that, actually I know I said that JFK was killed in Houston. John Jack JF Kennedy was assassinated in Houston, Texas. My bad. Picking up where we left off with the Titanic video, World War I was very much instigated by this secret roundtable society. Members that were in the society actually controlled the British media, and they were able to paint the Germans as the enemy. Why were the Germans the enemy? Well, because Britain and Germany were both focused on imperial expansion, and they both seemed to be interested in the same colonies or territories, so they were constantly battling with each other over where they could expand. In an effort to eliminate the German threat, as well as take control of their major assets and industries, they concocted this plan to basically ally all of the English-speaking Western democratic nations under one umbrella to fight this great war. On top of that, the investors for this newly formed Federal Reserve Bank in the U.S., well, they really needed the U.S. to start borrowing money. And through stalemates and standoffs, this war ended up lasting 4 years. They prolonged it as long as possible so that they could maximize the amount of money that they were making from this chaos. At the end of the Great War, with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, the Allied forces not only wanted to punish Germany for their role in instigating this whole conflict, but they also wanted to destroy its economy completely, because Germany was an industrial giant. In order to ensure the full economic collapse of Germany, there were certain provisions that were written into the Treaty of Versailles. These provisions were written by 2 lawyers. They were brothers. They worked for the law firm Sullivan and Cromwell in the U.S. It's just a corporate law firm. These 2 guys, Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles, they made sure that Germany would never recover by forcing them to pay reparations in the total of 132 billion marks. At face value, this seems like a way for them to completely destroy Germany and keep them from ever growing powerful again. But in actuality, this was a way for them to further consolidate the world's wealth into the hands of just a few. The economic burden of these reparations, as well as the lack of jobs or really any economy at the time, plus having to rebuild Germany after this war, created so much hyperinflation. A loaf of bread cost like 2 billion gold marks. People were turning in their life savings just to get food. And this once massive industrial giant was reduced to a point where they were so desperate that they would accept any sort of financial help that they possibly could get in order to stabilize their economy. The Dulles brothers had created such a dire financial situation for Germany that they had no choice but to accept American and British investor help. They allowed them to come in and start buying up all of these different industries and start expanding their own industries into Germany. These investments and loans allowed Germany to bounce back a whole lot faster than they were going to originally. However, they were only bouncing back because of all the investments from foreign investors. And just like Nathan Rothschild says, it doesn't really matter who's in the position of power. He who controls the money controls everything. But it certainly begs the question, why would these democratic industrialists who just spent tons of money trying to buy up industry in Germany, why would they allow the National Socialist Party to then take hold and allow Adolf Hitler to rise to power? I mean, isn't their entire goal democratic imperial expansion? Well, yeah, but after experiencing years of wartime economic growth, money was flowing like crazy. There's people working, producing weapons, ammunition, all kinds of stuff for war. War is profitable. And Adolf Hitler was a pretty radical dude. And if there's anybody they could count on to spark up another world war, it's this guy. The difference this time is that now all these foreign investors, all these allied forces, now have a little skin in the game because they have their money tied up in these German industries. For example, did you know that with the rising persecution of the Jewish people in Germany at the time, they were very desperate to get the hell out of there? So the Rothschild family actually struck up a deal with Hitler where they would transfer 60,000 Jews plus $100 million in assets to Palestine, which is where they would then set up and be free from persecution of Hitler. And in exchange, the Rothschild family would not oppose Hitler's reign and his rise to power, which seems pretty weird for the wealthiest Jewish family in the world to then condone what he's doing when he is known to be anti-Semitic. Also, did you know that the sons of the famous American railroad tycoon E.H. Harriman invested millions of dollars through loans in the Tyson Steel Company in Germany? And Tyson Steel would then go on to supply the metals and steel needed to run railroads to Auschwitz. Their company, Brown Brothers Harriman, was also able to capitalize on the lease-lend program that was signed in 1941, which basically allowed the U.S. arms manufacturers and industries to supply allies with whatever they needed on credit, so they didn't have to pay right up front. That sounds like a great deal. You guys just build as much as you want and pay us later, sure, whatever. No matter who won the war, they come out on top. They benefit either way. Did you know that U.S. Steel, founded by J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie, was not only supplying the U.S. with steel to make arms and tanks and whatever else, they were also supplying iron ore and steel-making technologies to Germany, which helped them build Auschwitz, helped them build tanks and other vehicles, helped them make weapons, yet again, playing both sides. Did you know that John D. Rockefeller and the Standard Oil Company partnered with the German chemical cartel IG Farben, supplying them with synthetic fuels, rubber, lead, so that they could go on to produce jet fuels and, more importantly, Zyklon B, which is the gas that they used in the chambers. And of course, they supplied the U.S. Allied forces with oil as well. And I'm sure that there's quite a few of you who don't know, General Motors, as well as Henry Ford and the Ford Company, expanded their operations into Germany. They were responsible for a lot of the military vehicles that the Germans were using at the time. And as you expected, Henry Ford is of course making military vehicles for the Allied forces as well. In fact, Ford's contributions were so great that Henry Ford received the Grand Cross of the German Eagle Award, which is the highest honor you can receive as a foreign national for your support of the Nazi Party. And Henry Ford set up multiple different manufacturing plants in Germany. During the war, a lot of those plants got hit with bombs from the Allied forces, so once the war was finished up, Henry Ford sued the US government for $15 million because of them bombing his manufacturing plants in Germany. And he won! You can't make this up.
Ford sued the U.S. Army, the U.S. government in the 50s because during the war, the U.S. Air Force bombed their tank-making facilities in Germany. And this is true. And what was it, like 52 or something? They sued the U.S. government for destroying their factories. And they won. They won the lawsuit. So I had to write a little song for Henry here. Ford built tanks for the Nazis, and the Nazis used those tanks to gun down lots of soldiers in the U.S. Army ranks. Yes, Henry Ford was a fascist and a nasty one was he. He built tanks for anyone for the proper fee.
And finally, did you know that Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's dad, at least allegedly, because George H.W. Bush has also been alleged to be the son of Nikola Tesla's assistant, and his real name is George H. Scherf Jr. And in this picture right here, you can see George H. Scherf Jr. as well as George H. Scherf Jr. Jr. And even more strange, Nikola Tesla says that the book Curious George was based on this George H.W. Bush Scherf character. The author from Curious George knew this information and was spreading this information, was taken out, if you can believe it. George H.W. Bush's dad was the director of the Union Banking Corporation, and they were responsible for managing the finances and the assets of different German corporations who were known to support the Nazi Party. And the Bush-Texas oil pipelines were also supplying American war efforts. Prior to the creation of the OSS in 1941, Franklin Delano Roosevelt started the Committee on Information. And just like every single intelligence agency since George Washington, their sole purpose was the U.S. propaganda machine, convincing the Americans that we need to be in this war. Prior to the formation of the CIA in 1947, there was another three-letter agency, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. The OSS was created in 1942 as America's very first official intelligence service. They were responsible for gathering intel for the Allied forces so they could win the war, but their main objective was keeping tabs on American investments in different German industrial businesses to make sure that those investments were protected.
They also became even more deeply involved in military intelligence. I say even more because the Dulles brothers, Averell Harriman, and the chief of Remington, Samuel Bush, a man referred to as the original Merchant of Death, had a relationship with American military intelligence stretching back into World War I. The lesson here being that the American variant of military intelligence started out with businessmen protecting their investments, just as if they were a mafia. Right from the very beginning, it had nothing to do with national security and everything to do with money.
So they didn't care about national security. They just cared about protecting investments. In 1945, as we near the end of World War II, the OSS engaged in Operation Sunrise. This operation was just negotiations between Nazi soldiers and the U.S. Allied forces, trying to get them to surrender. And if they agreed to surrender, then the U.S. would protect them from Allied attacks, and they would also provide them amnesty from any war crimes or any persecution from things they may have done during the war. With the surrender of these German forces in Italy, the Allied forces were able to move in, which brought us one step closer to the end of the war. In May of 1945, the OSS engaged in Operation Paperclip. And we've talked about this before, but this is where they brought tons of German scientists, engineers, physicists over to the U.S. and saved them from being persecuted for their war crimes or whatever they were doing for the Nazi Party, and actually employed them working underneath the Office of Strategic Services. The OSS also partnered with a guy named Reinhard Gehlen, who was the head of the German intelligence operation called the Gehlen Organization. His main job during the war was to analyze different Soviet threats, and at the end of the war, he offered his services and his intel to the OSS because obviously with the end of this war, we're going to need another one to keep these finances rolling in, and who better to attack than the communists, the Soviets. This just feels fishy from the get, because the US, through the Manhattan Project, had developed and used 2 atomic bombs. They destroyed Nagasaki and Hiroshima, so pretty obviously the US is the nuclear threat at this point. Because of this nuclear threat, the Soviets really wanted to get their hands on this same technology, because if they didn't, they're just sitting ducks. The US could destroy them at any moment. So through espionage efforts infiltrating the Manhattan Project, they were able to obtain information on how to create these weapons, and this is what led us right into the Cold War. Now I want you guys to think about something for just a sec. Picture yourself as a wealthy industrialist who's been funding and promoting these wars for the last 20 years, and now your enemy has been defeated. The threat to your finances and the threat to your livelihood is now gone. You're victorious. So what is the next biggest threat to you being a wealthy, powerful industrialist with lots and lots of money? Yeah, communism. Because communism levels the playing field. Everybody can play golf. Everybody gets to be first in line. Everybody rides in limos. Everybody eats and flies first class. And if I'm a wealthy, elite industrialist who's used to having the world at my fingertips and having whatever I want, yeah, that ain't happening. No on the communism. And you've just spent the last 5 years making bank off of this war. Now the war's over, what are you going to do? You're just going to be okay and complacent with not making as much money as you were? No, you're going to find a new enemy, a new bad guy, a new reason to go to war. And let me tell you, the Cold War would be literally a blessing for these wealthy industrialists. This would be an absolute godsend, because this is a war that would last almost 44 years. But the government alone cannot make this the enemy. In fact, now more than ever, they need some sort of intelligence service to start spreading propaganda to convince people that communism is the enemy. Communism is bad. This is why on July 26, 1947, President Harry S. Truman signed the National Securities Act, and this would also establish the formation of the Central Intelligence Agency. This is really interesting because the Central Intelligence Agency was started under this National Securities Act and basically gives them full power and authority to do whatever they want behind the scenes, do these secret covert operations, all in the name of protecting our national security interests, or our money. The CIA was underneath the executive branch, so they reported to the president. They did not report to Congress, so they did not need congressional approval to do anything. They can do whatever they want, as long as they have the president's permission. And honestly, sometimes they don't even need that. And you'll never guess who was instrumental in writing the legislation to get this National Security Act passed and form the CIA.
As I say, if you stop always and think of all the consequences of all the actions you take, you do nothing. This wasn't a world in which one could do nothing. It wasn't a do-nothing world. It was a world in those days, 48 on, though, for several years along there, when you had to do something and do it rapidly.
We had to do something, says the man who perhaps more than anyone else made CIA what it is today.
Yes, Allen Dulles. In an effort to ensure that we would never go without a communist conflict somewhere in the world, Truman announces the Truman Doctrine, which says that we will stand in support of any nation, any country who is opposed to communism. That same year, in 1947, Truman announces the Marshall Plan, which is our economic contributions to rebuilding Western Europe so that they can fend off the communists. This is why when Kim Il-sung wanted to reunite both North and South Korea and launched a full-on invasion across the 38th parallel, the U.S. felt obligated to stand behind our allies and fight this communist threat, leading us directly into the Korean War. And just as a quick refresh for you guys, Henry Ford provided licensing agreements with the Soviet Union so they could produce Ford vehicles. These vehicles were pumped out in the Soviet Union, but they could supply these vehicles to any one of their allies within the communist network, aka North Korea. So yet again, Henry Ford is funding and supplying both sides of this conflict. Because of Chinese intervention, the Korean War hit a stalemate and nothing really happened. We ended up pulling out and leaving the whole country separated at that 38th parallel, and there's kind of like a safe zone between North and South Korea. Still exists today. On May 29th, 1917, a young man is born in Brookline, Massachusetts. He was named after his grandfather, John Francis Fitzgerald, aka Honey Fitz. He was nicknamed Jack all throughout his childhood, but this young man was John Fitzgerald Kennedy, aka JFK. Jack was not a very healthy kid at all. In fact, he struggled with tons of diseases. He had whooping cough, measles, chicken pox, and then when he was 3 years old in 1920, he got a real bad case of scarlet fever. Had no idea what that was. Essentially, it is a strain of streptococcal virus, aka strep throat, but it's like way worse. You get rashes, you have a super high fever. It typically resolves itself with antibiotics, but for some reason, Jack was in the hospital for a month. His dad literally thought he was going to die, but after that month, he did get better, but it just shows he must have some sort of like immune disease because he was constantly sick throughout his entire life. By the time Jack was 8 years old, he was the second of 7 children. His older brother Joe, he had 4 sisters, Rosemary, Kathleen, Eunice, and Patricia, and he had a younger brother, Robert, aka Bobby, and then he would actually have 2 more siblings, Jean and Teddy, but they weren't born at that point. 9 kids, dude. Joe and Rose Kennedy were getting extremely busy, clearly. Jack went to a boarding school for adolescent boys in Connecticut called Chowate. He played tennis, basketball, football, and golf, and he was a nerd and loved reading. I'm just kidding, but he did like reading. He graduated from Chowate in 1936, and then he went to Harvard. He was studying government, political science, and particularly he was interested in international foreign affairs. Both Jack and his older brother Joe went to Harvard, and they both played football. And one day during practice, Jack got tackled really hard, and one of his discs got ruptured, and he had this permanent, awful back injury that would stick with him for the rest of his life. In fact, one of the only reasons he stayed sitting up in the limousine when he got shot was because he was wearing a back brace. Jack graduated in 1940 with a bachelor's degree in political science, aka government, which I didn't know government was like an official degree, but I guess it is. He immediately went into the Navy as a lieutenant, and he would eventually work his way up to an officer. They would station him in the South Pacific, and he would actually get to man his own torpedo patrol boat called the PT-109. He had a 12-man crew, and they were supposed to be stopping Japanese ships from delivering supplies to their soldiers. Then on August 2nd, 1943, JFK and his 12-man crew were out patrolling the waters when suddenly this Japanese destroyer just shows up out of nowhere, and they're hauling ass. It smashes right through his torpedo patrol boat, cutting the whole boat in two. 2 of his crew members die. The rest of them are all scattered everywhere in the water, and he's able to grab a piece of the boat that's still floating, and one of his crewmates was actually burned really, really badly and was having a hard time like staying afloat. So he grabbed him, he rounded up all of his guys, they floated on this piece of boat for a little while, and then he realized, like, I don't know, we got to do something. The closest option for him at that point was to swim 3 miles to this island through enemy waters, hoping that the locals or whoever was there won't kill him when they get there. He swims 3 miles, holding the strap to the life vest of his burned buddy in his teeth. 3 miles. That's insane. They get to this island. The locals are super chill. He's able to call for help. They get some more, planes or whatever to come rescue his team, and then they all head back. What a freaking hero. Jack was awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for his bravery and service to his crew, and when he returned to the U.S., unfortunately he found out that his brother Joe, who also was in the military, he was flying planes over in Europe, his plane disappeared. Joe Sr. always had high hopes that Joe Jr. would become president. He set both the boys up as best he could, going to an Ivy League school and using as many of his mafia and mob connections as possible to help accelerate them up the chain. Because not only did Joe Sr. serve as the very first chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, but he was the U.S. ambassador to Great Britain And he was a part of the Havara Agreement that moved all these Jews out of Germany and facilitated this support of Adolf Hitler's regime. He also ran a bootlegging operation and had ties to the Italian mafia and the Israeli mob. He was doing business and was running these operations using the mafia and mob for distribution, working with guys like Frank Costello, Sam Giancana, and Meyer Lansky. So unfortunately, with Joe being gone, Jack was his next best bet, and he really pushed Jack in 1946 to run for Congress, and he was elected to Congress in Massachusetts in 1946. He then served 3 terms in the House of Representatives. Each term is 2 years, so that'd be 6 years. And then in 1952, he was elected to the U.S. Senate. In 1953, he married the beautiful Jackie Bouvier, a Washington Times Herald writer. And then in 1957, they had their first child, daughter named Caroline. On July 13th, 1960, he was nominated as the Democratic presidential candidate. He was running with Lyndon B. Johnson, and he was running against Richard Nixon. And on November 8th of 1960, he defeated Richard Nixon, becoming the youngest president at the age of 43. He was also the very first Catholic president, which I didn't realize. And in 1960, his son John Jr. was born. Here's another little fun fact for you guys. Jackie Kennedy was super involved when she was the First Lady. She is actually the person who was responsible for getting the Air Force One plane repainted with the design that it currently has. It was like an orange cone, looked super ugly before that.
This was a 707, a big airplane, a majestic airplane, because Mrs. Kennedy and Jack Kennedy had helped design the colors. The colors you see on Air Force One today and the lettering were designed by Mrs. Kennedy and Jack Kennedy. It was a brand new airplane that came into his administration. So they had a piece of it in the history as well.
So it just needed a woman's touch, I guess. And she was also responsible for bringing tons of old historical artwork and furniture, just a bunch of different stuff that they took out of the White House to bring back some of the American history and reinvigorate the life of the White House with this rich history. So I thought that was kind of cool. I didn't know she was that influential in doing things like that. During JFK's short presidency, he did tons of great things. But most notably, he started the Peace Corps, which should give you some idea of where his head was at the time.
I have today signed an executive order providing for the establishment of a Peace Corps on a temporary pilot basis. I'm also sending to Congress a message proposing authorization of a permanent Peace Corps. This corps will be a pool of trained men and women sent overseas by the United States government or through private institutions and organizations to help foreign countries meet their urgent needs for skilled manpower. It is our hope to have between 500 to 1,000 people in the field by the end of this year. We will send Americans abroad who are qualified to do a job. We will send those abroad who are committed to the concept which motivates the Peace Corps. It will not be easy. None of the men and women will be paid a salary. They will live at the same level as the citizens of the country which they're sent to, doing the same work, eating the same food, speaking the same language. We're going to put particular emphasis on those men and women who have skills in teaching, agriculture, and in health. I'm hopeful that it will be a source of satisfaction to Americans and a contribution to world peace.
And he was also the first president to ask Congress to approve more than $22 billion for Project Apollo.
240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, capable of standing heat and stresses several times more than have ever been experienced, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, carrying all the equipment needed for propulsion, guidance, control, communications, food, and survival on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere at speeds of over 25,000 miles per hour, causing heat about half that on the temperature of the sun, almost as hot as it is here today, and do all this, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first before this decade is out, then we must be bold.
Space, solidifying him as the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln. On June 11th, 1963, he proposed a new civil rights bill to Congress. And this quote that he said when he proposed this whole bill, I just thought was super cool, so I wanted to share it with you guys.
This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. Today we are committed to a worldwide struggle to promote and protect the rights of all who wish to be free.
And he's right. We're all immigrants here. Don't tell ICE. 1964 was an election year, and there was 2 states that they really wanted to focus on with their campaigning because they weren't doing as well in those states, and that would be Florida and Texas. So in November of 1963, they toured down to Tampa. They did a quick, just an appearance there, and then they moved over to Dallas, and that would be on November 22nd of 1963. Using the presidential limousine, he's just going to make his way through Dealey Plaza in Dallas. Him, Texas Governor John Connally, Connally's wife, her name's Nellie, Jackie Kennedy, and then we've got 2 Secret Service agents. We've got William Greer and Roy Kellerman. William Greer is the driver, Kellerman's the passenger. And as they make the turn from Houston Street onto Elm Street, one of the Secret Service agents is walking up right alongside with President Kennedy. While making this turn, it looks like his leading agent calls him and tells him to come back up off the car. He seems really confused. He's throws his arms up. He's like, what the hell? He doesn't really understand why, but he does it. Now, Clint Hill, the guy who would jump on the back of the car after it speeds away after JFK was shot, he would say that the reason he did that was because he was taking off and headed to lunch. And he was saying, all right, later, guys, I'm off to lunch. Have fun. Right in the middle of all that? Really? I highly doubt that.
I had to comment on that. I was the agent on the left rear outside, running alongside the car. The agent on the right rear, working the car, the right rear at that time, is an agent named Don Lawton. Don Lawton's assignment that day was not to ride in the follow-up car. His assignment was to remain at Love Field and handle our return, secure the airport for us when we came back. We were going to fly on to Austin, Texas. And what he was doing was, when he came back off the car, he was saying, okay, you guys, I'm going to lunch. Have a good trip. I talked to him within the last month, and he reiterated to me the same thing again. That's exactly what he was doing. Just making a gesture to us in the follow-up car. See ya. I'm going to lunch. Have a good trip.
So Clint Hill basically says that it had been part of the plan all along for Lawton, seen here on the right, to go off duty and leave the presidential vehicle. He said he was going off to lunch. Have a nice day. Seems rather dubious if you analyse the body language of Lawton himself. He shrugs his shoulders 3 times and holds both his arms out, as if asking a question or expressing his amazement at what he's just been ordered to do. Is this a guy that's simply saying, right, I'm going off duty, I'm going to have my lunch, see you later? He shrugs his shoulders 3 times, takes another look back, looks at his boss, Emery Roberts, who's just ordered him to back away from the vehicle. Now, this is a procedure whereby Secret Service agents visit the location weeks in advance, get everything down to a fine art detail. Does this look like it was carefully planned? Or does it look like it was a spur-of-the-moment order that caused consternation and baffled Lawton himself when the order to back away was given?
Regardless, they make the turn onto Elm Street. They're cruising down. There's multiple people taking video footage of the event. The most famous of all of them is the Zapruder film, filmed by Abraham Zapruder, who was actually up on the grassy knoll area. Now, there is entirely way too much for us to get into with the Zapruder film. Way, way too much. But I will direct you to this, I don't know where it'll be, this video called the Zapruder Film Mystery. It is fascinating. And this guy, Doug Horn, interviews one of the guys who was in charge of making the briefing boards, because they didn't have technology back then, so they'd make little boards with pictures. He says that the film he used showed crazy blowback of brain matter and blood and all kinds of crazy stuff out of the back of his head. You can even see a piece of his skull on the back of the car, in which case Jackie Kennedy is supposedly reaching for. That's why she was diving on the back of the car. Anyways, the briefing boards he made don't end up getting used as the official briefing boards. There was an entire other set of dudes who used an entire other set of film to make second briefing boards, and those were the official ones used, and they're in the archives currently. What Doug Horne says is that there has been serious alterations to this film, and the film would typically go out to Kodak if the government was doing anything with it. They had this place called the Hawkeye, and they would send film there that needed to be, I don't know, analyzed or messed with, or I don't really know what they would do. But I also found something pretty interesting in my research. Kodak was one of those companies who had tons of subsidiaries operating in Germany who did business with the Nazis throughout the entirety of the war. So Kodak's Nazi ties are pretty tight, and yet the government uses them for all of their photo analysis, and this Hawkeye place is like the place for photo analysis and like manipulation. What he says they did was they blacked out the back of his head, which you can see right here. There is like a dark black spot, and if you improve the grain and you improve the quality, it's obviously more evident. But one of the other proofs is that certain frames, things will be clear in part of the picture, but then the background will be totally blurred. And I don't really understand the science of film manipulation. Like, I get it with video editing, but I don't get it with like actual strips of film editing manipulation. That it's another level of crazy to me. But what he says is that they cut out strips of that film, so there's just missing pieces of what happened. And the reason they did this was to minimize the visuals of him actually going back into the left. It was supposed to make him look like he just went forward a little bit more and then fell over, as well as hide the fact that there was a huge mist that blew out of the back of his head. Also, check this out. My brother showed this to me. This tree right here, if you look real closely, the trunk disappears, turns green, as if something's been manipulated. And then seconds later, fractions of a second later, it turns back into a tree. That's kind of weird, huh? And it just so happens to coincide with these sprocket hole movements. And these sprocket hole movements seem to happen during all of the critical stages in this film. Anytime that I think a bullet is being shot or he's being hit, something, there's a sprocket hole movement. There's no like regular interval for it. It just happens randomly, but it's just weird. It's weird. But if you're interested in that, definitely check out this video with Doug Horne. It'll answer all of your questions. But I digress. Now, unfortunately, this film at the time didn't record sound. So we're left up to our eyes to figure out what happened. And the first thing I want to point out, after the Secret Service agent gets called off of President Kennedy's car, he's told to come back, seems super confused. There's a reason for that. Because typically, him and Clint Hill, they would be riding up on these little platforms, holding onto the little bars on the back of the limo, and there would be a human shield for the president and the president's wife. Without them being up on the car, without that protection, there's an open line of sight from behind President Kennedy. As the car cruises down, just before passing behind this sign, we see President Kennedy reach up and like start holding his neck. Then he slumps over towards Jackie, and she looks really concerned. Kellerman in the passenger seat looks super concerned, and so does William Greer. He turns around and takes a look, then he turns around, checks out the road, and then he does something really, really strange. He slows the car down. There's pictures of brakes being applied, and this Zapruder film, it doesn't necessarily show this slowdown, but that's because those scenes were edited out. If you're really paying attention, you can definitely see it in the Zapruder film. But the only telltale sign is Governor Connally actually lunging forward, and both the driver and the passenger, the Secret Service agents, they also lunge forward. So that indicates that the brakes were applied. There's another film called the Nix film that was filmed from across the street. And this film actually shows the moment where the car slows down, the motorcycles catch up a little bit and almost pass before they stop. Secret Service agent Clint Hill is able to run and jump on the back of the car because just before that, when the car stopped, a second shot rings out in what would be famously known as frame 313. We can see President Kennedy receives a final hit right in the head. We would later on find out that this was the third shot fired, allegedly. The first shot actually ricocheted off the curb. Parts of the curb actually hit this guy named James Tague, who was kind of a pissed off passerby. He was trying to drive to a lunch date and got held up by traffic with all this stuff. So he got out of his car to see what was going on, and then suddenly he gets hit in the face with a ricochet of a bullet.
It wasn't but about 30 seconds till the presidential motorcade rounded the corner of Main Street to turn over onto Elm. But right after the presidential car had turned the corner, I heard these three loud noises, and I jumped behind the concrete abutment, which is between Main and Commerce. There was a motorcycle policeman that just stopped his motorcycle up by the monument and had drawn his revolver and was racing up the hill to the left of me. At this time, I says, you know, I felt something sting me on the face as I was standing down there. I said, just sting, and Walters looked at me and says, yes, says, you got blood on your cheek. He says, where were you standing? I says, well, down by the underpass. So we started walking down there, and when Walters got about, well, I'd say 10 feet away, he says, look there on the curb, there was a very visible mark on the curb where a bullet had struck. Either a fragment of the bullet or a piece of the concrete. It flew up and scratched my face. And he said, go to the city police headquarters and make a statement.
They immediately sped to Parkland Hospital. They tried life-saving measures on the president, but unfortunately, he was gone. They would conduct an investigation, basically like the 9/11 report in many ways, called the Warren Report, and this report would officially come out and explain what happened. And here's what they say happened. A man named Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the school book depository building, which was directly behind where the president was driving. These 3 shots were fired out of a Carcano Model 38 bolt-action rifle, and they were all fired within 4.8 to 7.9 seconds. So you had to crank. And you better be a good shot. The minimum firing time for this rifle is 2.3 seconds per shot. Now, what they say is that the first shot hit Kennedy in the neck and hit Governor Connally. Now, ballistics would later show that that's impossible.
They found JFK was shot twice from behind by Lee Harvey Oswald from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, and that the bullet that struck John F. Kennedy in his neck is the same bullet that struck and went through Governor John Connally, who was sitting in the passenger seat in front of JFK.
Those can't be the same bullet. They don't align. We can't make Governor Connally's position match.
They then took the infamous Zapruder film that has the clearest video of when John F. Kennedy was shot and matched it to their point cloud. And everything was matching up perfectly until the Texas governor was shot too, reportedly by the bullet that went through the president first.
What, through the evaluation, comes to show is that those aren't in line. Governor Connally, his wound is sitting 6 to 10 inches towards the outside of the vehicle. You have to slide Governor Connally to the inside of the vehicle. You have to slide him to the left to get that alignment.
Based on those findings, Stoll says you have to look at a new hypothesis that there was a second bullet. The question, from where?
The man, Lee Harvey Oswald, left his rifle on the 6th floor, bolted down the stairs. As he was walking around on the streets trying to avoid detection, he is accosted by a police officer named Officer Tippet. He decides to pull out his revolver and takes out Officer Tippet. He fires 3 bullets into his stomach, and then he fires a final shot, and this part's important, in the back of the head with a massive exit wound on the front right side of the head. I guess because he's so spooked, he tries to hide in the movie theater without a movie ticket. So the manager calls the police and says, yo, there's some suspicious guy over here. Maybe you should check him out. They come over, they arrest him, and the whole time while he's in police custody, he says, I'm a patsy. I didn't do it. I'm a patsy. It wasn't me. This is a setup.
I'd like some legal representation. These police officers have not allowed me to have any. I don't know what this is all about. Sir?
You shoot the president?
I work in that building.
You shoot the president?
No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
And he also says, I'm not resisting, because he was extremely worried that they were just going to take him out right then and there. They claim he was a lone gunman And they say that his motives were hatred of American society and authority, his Marxist ideologies. He loved Castro. He really wanted to be remembered in history, and he had resentment over his failed defection to the USSR. Basically, the Russians just laughed at him and said, haha, yeah, whatever, and then they denied him access or citizenship, and he had to slink back over to the US. So this is what really made him want to show them. It's like, I'll show the world that I'm somebody. I'll show these Soviets. And yet, when given the opportunity to take credit for this and boast about what he did and get his message out there, he doesn't take it.
However, I protested at that time that I was not allowed legal representation.
Did you kill the president?
No, I have not been charged with that. The first thing I heard about it was when the newspaper reporters in the hall asked me that question.
2 days later, Oswald's being transported down to county jail from the police station. He's being televised on national TV, surrounded by tons of police officers, tons of press, and a Jewish nightclub owner, mobster, who somehow used his connections to get in real close, on live TV, steps in and takes out Lee Harvey Oswald. Boom!
This is the basement floor of the Dallas City Hall, and that's a scuffle on the basement floor. It seems to...
He's rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately, he's unresponsive. Now, just as a quick little fun fact, Jacob Rubenstein, aka Jack Ruby, was also seen by the same psychiatrist we've been talking about for the last few weeks, Dr. Joylyn West, MK Ultra specialist. That to me says straight up cover up. There are multiple different proofs to show that this lone gunman theory is ridiculous. I want to focus in on just a few that I found to be the most convincing. Number 1, this magic bullet theory. Supposedly there was 5 bullet holes in Texas Governor John Connally, 2 bullet holes in John F. Kennedy. That's a total of 7 bullets right there. There's allegedly another bullet that hit the visor and shot off, a very clear bullet hole in the windshield.
The presidential limousine was there. Had been standing there for some time just watching the back of the emergency room. Talked to my friend next to me and said, look, there's a bullet hole in the windshield, and pointed it out to them. But it was very clear. It was a through and through bullet hole through the windshield of the car from the front to the back.
Then we've got the bullet that hit the curb and ricocheted. And we've also got this other bullet that was definitely shot from the grassy knoll that actually hits the grass across the street from the president.
The shot which all of the well-known assassination witnesses described as coming from behind the picket fence missed completely and ripped up the grass at Jean Hill's feet. She did not even notice. But we know this is true because the FBI told her so. Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters is here seen finding the bullet which struck in the grass near the manhole cover. He hands it on to one of the fake FBI men, who pockets it.
So we've got I don't even know, multiple shots, but they say there was only 3 shots that somehow poked 7 holes in 2 different dudes. This magic bullet, they say, split off of Connally's wrist and then ricocheted through their body. They also say that the bullet that went into JFK's head did a U-turn and blew right out the backside. Nothing makes sense. This magic bullet theory? What? How did they think that was going to fly? Number 2, the unresponsiveness of Officer Tippet. That just makes no sense. Lee Harvey Oswald is out trying to avoid detection, but he's going to take out this police officer? Come on. Apparently, Officer Tippet was a JFK lookalike. Men on the force would call him Jack or JFK as a nickname. It's kind of interesting that he turns up unresponsive the same day that JFK does. Now, when JFK's body was being loaded onto Air Force 2, they had called Jackie Kennedy into the airplane for this famous photo where Lyndon B. Johnson is looking at this other dude and he's winking at him. Pretty suspicious. But they called Jackie in there, and this was the only time that she was away from John F. Kennedy's body. While she was away from his body, they put his casket into Air Force 2. They also loaded up Officer Tippet's body in this plain Jane casket. Now, they hire this doctor. His name is John Melvin Liggett. He is a reconstructive mortician. His whole mission is to come in and make Officer Tippet look like JFK because they realize they messed up. We find out they fired like a total of 16 shots between 8 different dudes because there was tons of witnesses that all saw different people in different areas, all of which looked suspicious and had rifles. Plus we've got this bullet that flew across, hitting the grass. And I swear in the Zapruder film and the Nix film, when you slow it down super hard, you can see little lines where the bullets are flying. But the back of JFK's head is blown out completely. And that's for obvious reasons, because the bullet entered in through the front and out through the back. That's just what happens.
The second wound was here in the throat, right above the necktie. It was a small opening, very small, 3 to 5 millimeters, about the size of your little finger. I looked at the wound again. I wanted to know and remember this the rest of my life. And the rest of my life, I will always know he was shot from the front.
The bullet struck about where and passed about where?
From here through.
And taking out
the back or the occipital part, the back of your head. This was gone.
And this is why, at the very first press conference, Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff correctly described the cause of death and direction of the shot.
Now, because this doctor realizes while he's doing these surgeries, trying to seal up these wounds and make Officer Tippet look just like JFK, he realizes that the brain, it does not look at all like what the brain should look like if he had a bullet come through the back. So he kind of just freaks out and he just removes the entire brain altogether. That's kind of suspicious already. In fact, when JFK finally lands and they perform an autopsy, the doctor who does the autopsy says that his brain literally just fell out the back of his head.
I helped put President Kennedy's body in a bronze ceremonial casket on November 22nd, 1963, at Parkland Memorial Hospital.
Instead, mortuary technician Paul O'Connor received a coffin so dull and nondescript no one could believe it had been utilized to transport the body of a president.
It was a very plain casket, and when I say plain, I mean it was pinkish gray. It had pink and gray on the sides. There was nothing fancy about it as far as being bronze. It wasn't bronze.
While Siebert and O'Neill made their now famous and entirely correct observation that the body seemed to have undergone surgery prior to autopsy, mainly in the head area, Commander Humes himself testified that the moment he touched the head, pieces of the skull fell down onto the autopsy table.
Now, there are some photos that do kind of point to the fact that this could be Officer Tippet, and it could have been because he did some sort of plastic surgery under the skin, preparing this body to look like JFK. Even more evidence is that Bobby Kennedy and Jackie both said when they finally saw him that it did not look like Jack at all. It was a different person. We've also got men who performed the autopsy who said that they received a casket. They both described this casket very differently. One was a brown bronze casket, really nice, suitable for a president. The other one looked like a giant suitcase that had been through multiple different trips, and it was not a presidential looking casket. And the guys talk about how they were super surprised to see that the president's body was in this casket. Because of the time constraints, this doctor didn't have enough time to make things look right, so he did the best that he could. Really, the only photos we see of JFK are ones from the front. You can rarely see photos of the back of his head.
The simple answer is that this is not JFK. It's the corpse of Officer J.D. Tippet, surgically altered to look like the president. On arriving home, Liggett was informed the plot was in serious trouble. His wife Lois told how he staggered in the door, unkempt, dishevelled, and quite obviously exhausted, which was very out of character for a man who took pride in always being neat, tidy, and organised.
It was about 24 hours before I heard from him. He came home and he walked in the door, and when I saw him, he physically looked like he had really been through a very traumatic experience. His clothes were disarrayed, and that was so out of character for him. And he said, "We're going to get out of town for a while until all of this blows over." And that was a quote, because I thought, well, what blows over?
Then we've got this little video clip right here.
I can't honestly say that I've ever been completely relieved of the fact that there might have been international connections.
You mean you still feel that there might have been?
Well, I have not completely discounted.
Pretty self-explanatory. I mean, LBJ said it himself. Of course, we've got the Zapruder film, and I was looking at the film one time, and I was zooming in, trying to see something, like trying to see if you could see the skull on the back of the car. And as I zoomed in, I was noticing the black spot that they were talking about, but I also noticed that there's like weird pixels. I don't really know what it would be called or how to describe it, but there's like weird little translucent, almost non-visible, just like different layers that you would imagine if they were doctoring film, they would have been putting something over or like adding to it. There'd be something over that layer of film that you'd be able to see. And that's what I felt like I was seeing. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. But the best evidence to prove that this was in fact a conspiracy is this photo that occurred right when JFK got shot. And you can see fairly clearly even a pretty familiar Lee Harvey Oswald in the background. So it doesn't look like he was on the 6th floor after all. Lee Harvey Oswald was working for the CIA. He was also an FBI informant. When Oswald defected to the Soviet Union, this was all a part of the false defection program through the CIA. They were basically just using this to lure out communists, and he had to really push this narrative that he was really a Soviet defector. So he actually went to the USSR, lived in Minsk for 2 years, came back with a wife and a kid. When he got back, he started up all these communist, like pro-communist, pro-Castro, just organizations or like little movements. He even got arrested for passing out flyers related to pro-Castro stuff. Yet again, this was just to lure out actual communists and Castro supporters, and he was reporting all this information back to the FBI and the CIA. Then, just a month before this all happens to JFK, Lee Harvey Oswald is sent down to Mexico City. He's filmed entering the Cuban and Soviet embassies. He applies for visas at both. He's also recorded on phone calls trying to do the same thing. He's either denied his visas or he just chooses to not get them and then returns back to the US. But let's go ahead and take a look at these hard evidence photographs of Lee Harvey Oswald in these embassies. And I'll go ahead and give you a second to just take them all in. And let me just inform you that these were officially admitted as evidence for the Warren Report. Yo, that's not Snowflake. Super weird, makes no sense. What the H? And of course, the CIA was tracking him. They had eyes on him the whole time because he's a national security threat that works for the CIA. But why does it matter that this Oswald guy was a communist or looked like a communist? What's the importance of that? Well, like we've already talked about, during the Cold War, communism was the threat. It was the enemy. They're trying to paint him to look like the enemy. But why does it matter? As many of you guys may already know, some of you may not know this, after the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro took power in 1959, and he pretty much turned the entire country of Cuba into a communist state. He aligned with the Soviets, and the Soviets provided him with nuclear missile technology, and they started building nuclear missiles. With the proximity to the US, those missiles could be launched and touched down within a matter of minutes. So this was a huge threat to the US, and obviously with the threat of communism, the threat of the nuclear warfare, just everything was just at such a boiling point. These missiles were way too close to home, and they were attributing this to Fidel Castro. So JFK and the CIA, just America in general, American intelligence, we knew that we had to take out Fidel Castro. We had to stop this. Also, when Fidel Castro took over, he cracked down hard on organized crime. He shut down all of the casinos in Cuba because they were all tied back to the mob, the same mob that Jack Ruby was working for. Now, JFK was on board with trying to dethrone Fidel Castro. He had entertained the idea of actually taking him out, but he didn't think that that was the most viable option because it might make the US look hostile. So he wasn't really on board with like an actual murder plot, but the CIA, on the other hand, they didn't care. And this is what leads us to the Bay of Pigs. Now, the CIA has been working with the Israeli mob, the Italian mafia, tons of different organized crime organizations. Now, they started working with the mafia during World War II. Back at home in these major ports, the mafia and the mob actually controlled these ports. And they were using these guys to basically tell them what was going on, make sure that if there was any Axis stuff going on or any sort of tampering going on with these ports, that they relayed this information to the Allies. This is literally the CIA and the mafia/mob working in tandem. It's basically like different sides of the same coin. You can't get more blunt than that. The CIA is just as dirty as the mafia or the mob.
The one thing I recognized was there are no black hats and there are no white hats. They all conduct themselves the exact same. And very good evidence of that is that the CIA would hire two so-called mafia men, Sam Giancana and John Roselli, to assassinate Fidel Castro. If there's such a difference, you're not supposed to have anything to do with each other. But in essence, the remark is really they're all in bed together. They all do business together.
Now, because Cuba had shut down all these casinos, they were using the mafia to help them carry out these covert operations. They were planning to poison Castro, take him out with explosives. They were planning to do all these random, weird, different assassination attempts in order to take him out. They were also taking Cuban exiles that were thrown out during the revolution, people who hated Castro. They were training them to be these kill soldiers, MK Ultra. So the CIA, during the Bay of Pigs invasion, takes these exile soldiers and tries to take out Fidel Castro, but they are completely unsuccessful. The CIA actually calls in for help, asking for backup to help with this whole situation, but Kennedy says no. This was not authorized by me. You guys are operating secretly underneath whatever orders, I don't even know what, and I don't condone this operation, so no, I'm not sending help. The operation was a huge failure, huge embarrassment for Allen Dulles, the current and longest standing CIA director who was pretty much running all of these programs, as well as George H.W. Bush, who was an agent at the time, Agent Poppy. And this embarrassment obviously caused tension between JFK and the CIA. Now, because of this failure, the whole Bay of Pigs thing, JFK fired Allen Dulles from the CIA, from his director position. Now, that's going to cause problems. Dulles has been a major player in the CIA pretty much since the beginning, pretty much founded the CIA. So it's kind of interesting that this Warren Commission, this investigative team, was led by none other than Allen Dulles. That makes no sense unless you're trying to cover this up. Let's take it one step further, though. The chief of the counterintelligence staff, Mr. James Angleton, who worked directly under Allen Dulles during his directorship of the CIA, he's best known for leaking nuclear technology secrets to the Mossad and the Israeli government. In fact, he's credited with helping them start and build the Dimona reactor at their nuclear testing research center. He also helped smuggle materials out of the U.S. over to Israel, helping them to continue furthering their nuclear research. And when Mr. Angleton passed away, there was 2 funerals held in his honor, both of which were attended exclusively by Mossad intelligence officers and big-time politicians at the time. It was so exclusive that no media was allowed at all, but there was 100% 2 different memorial services for a Christian Zionist from the U.S. who worked for the CIA. So why else would they have done that unless he was somebody pretty close to the Mossad? Now, Mr. Angleton was doing all of this against President Kennedy's wills. He was actually trying to facilitate inspections to where they would come over and inspect and make sure that they weren't developing nuclear missiles. He was trying really hard to keep people from arming with atomic weapons and really pushing this peace thing. So he was fighting the Israeli nuclear program really, really hard at that point, only to find out that James Angleton this entire time has been sneaking technology over their way. And they say that the reason Jack Ruby actually took out Oswald is because he was a CIA asset and he would know all about the connections between the mob, James Angleton, the nuclear program, and what they were planning to do with everything, as well as their assistance in getting JFK elected in the first place, because Joe Kennedy had serious connections with Meyer Lansky, with Sam Giancana, and with Frank Costello. So he used these strings to help pull the state of Illinois, which was a huge state for President Kennedy during that election. And because they helped him out, they figured that he would scratch their backs too. But as we talked about last week, as soon as JFK got into office, he appointed Bobby Kennedy as Attorney General. He waged full-on war on the mafia and the mob. His big push was taking care of organized crime. So he essentially just turned on the same people that put him and his brother into office. Sure, that would piss off the mob a little bit.
Would you tell us whether if you have opposition from anybody that you dispose of them by having them stuffed in a trunk? Is that what you do, Mr. Giancana?
Decline to answer because I honestly believe my answer might tend to incriminate.
Will you tell us anything about any of your operations, or you just giggle every time I ask you a question?
Decline to answer because I honestly believe my answer might tend to incriminate me.
I thought only little girls giggled, Mr. Giancana.
Then if we consider what we talked about last week, if he really had shared all this stuff with Marilyn Monroe, then what the hell? The CIA doesn't like that. He's exposing top-level secrets, which is why it's very possible that the CIA took out Marilyn Monroe because of what she knew, and then shortly after that, took out JFK. The main reason why the CIA would want to take him out is because after the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK was able to diplomatically negotiate the removal of the nuclear weapons with the agreement that the U.S. would basically leave Cuba alone, and they would just kind of agree not to be so explosive and radical with the threat of nuclear attack. This gave JFK lots of hope that there could be a peaceful resolve to the Cold War. In fact, that was his goal. He was trying to end the Cold War. We were getting involved in Vietnam at this point. Things were starting to escalate the same way they did in Korea. Things had split in half. The North and South are fighting. We're sending in soldiers to try and help. And yet, this war is just to keep this war going. It's just to keep fighting. It's just to keep fueling this conflict. In fact, the CIA actually had something known as Operation Northwoods. This was a plan just like I talked about in my 9/11 videos, just like the Gulf of Tonkin, just like 9/11, just like so many other incidents. They were planning to take out American citizens, plan different terrorist attacks, plan the sinking of ships, just all kinds of different stuff so that they could encourage support for an invasion of Cuba. Now, JFK found out about this and was like, no, definitely not. And he really started to feel like the CIA was just, it's a rogue agency. They're on their own. He can't control them anymore. And at this point, he sees them as a serious threat. By Christmas of 1963, JFK says he's going to be bringing home 1,000 soldiers from Vietnam with a full evacuation from the country and the whole war by 1965. This is what's known as NSAM 263. He then fires Allen Dulles. He removes all paramilitary ops from the CIA, and he places them under the direct supervision of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So they no longer can just operate freely and do what they want. And JFK is actually quoted as saying that he wants to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. Okay, yeah, that's pretty threatening to the CIA. And Allen Dulles, who just got fired, and James Angleton, who's working for the mob and the Israelis, and who now is having to sneak around even harder because he's under direct supervision of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All of these things certainly played a role in the CIA having motive to take out JFK. But in my opinion, the one thing that really put his head on the chopping block was his speech that he gave and the comments he made about secret societies. Listen to this.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security, seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors, for as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
Now remember, the function and intention of the CIA and the OSS was to protect the interests and assets and investments of this wealthy Illuminati cabal of investors, industrialists, and financiers. So the mob, the mafia, the CIA, and now these secret societies, the wealthy elites, these Nazis that funded Hitler, who now own most of the world and are focused entirely on keeping this war machine fueled and alive, he's now threatened their money machine. So, what do you guys think happened to JFK, and Lee Harvey Oswald, and Marilyn Monroe, and Bobby Kennedy, and Sam Giancana, and so many more?
On the 22nd of February 1967, Eladio Del Valle and David Ferry were both murdered within minutes of each other, when it seemed they might give information to the Jim Garrison investigation. Charles Voigt Harrelson and Milwaukee Phil Aldericio suffered convenient early deaths in jail, and having been ordered to testify before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, both Charles Nicoletti and George de Mohrenschildt were shot dead at the same time on the 29th of March 1977.
The string of deaths that happens after JFK, the people that the CIA felt like were loose ends, needed silencing, it's too much for me to go through in this video. Let me just say that Johnny Roselli, who went to prison and spilled the beans on the whole thing, the ties with the CIA and the mob, all the things that they were doing, their role in taking out the president, he ends up in an oil barrel floating in the ocean. Okay, so cover up? Now, of the 8 different shooters who fired multiple different rounds at that limousine, there's only one shot that really mattered, and that's the last and final shot that hit JFK. I've watched a lot of videos on where this shot possibly came from, and I am fully 100% convinced that the only place that truly makes sense, that really could have fooled a lot of people, is this drainage hole, this drainage ditch along the curb. You can walk into it, you can walk back out of it. It's a perfect little spot, you won't be noticed. And the line of sight from this area to JFK in the spot where frame 313 stops is the perfect angle for that bullet to come up, hit him on the right side of the head, knock his head up and to the left, causing the massive splatter that we see, ultimately ending JFK's life.
Incredibly, the answer has lain hidden in the most well-known and iconic image from the assassination of the motorcycle policeman heaving his bike onto its stand. Look now as we freeze frame him here. This is the moment when the whole world was looking up the hill toward the man who had fired from the grassy knoll, but that is not where the police officer is looking. He is looking down into the storm drain, because that is where that shot at a stationary car came from. But while above ground, the world was taking pictures and running and screaming and trying to figure out what had happened, the other young man was stumbling along 400 yards of a reeking, fetid Dallas sewer pipe to emerge from this culvert. And he was not Lee Harvey Oswald, or Roscoe White, or J.D. Tippet, nor even a Cuban or Russian communist. His name was Jack Allen Lawrence. And we know that after stumbling up this bank, he turned up 15 minutes later at the Lincoln Mercury car showroom, where he'd obtained a job with false references, pale, sweating, and, on a hot sunny day in Dallas, covered in mud.
That's not to say that there wasn't a shooter on the grassy knoll, the badge man. In fact, that bullet that went across the road and almost hit the lady in the grass, that was probably from Badge Man, the dude on the grassy knoll. There was also multiple shooters in the school book depository, more shooters in the building across the street that went along Houston Street. So between all of these different shooters, it's surprising it actually took them that many shots to get him. And it makes sense why William Greer stopped the limousine, because he had seemed to get this signal somehow that the president was still okay. He was still alive, so he had to do something. These theories are just theories, but they say that there's a little painted yellow patch on the curb down the stretch of Elm Street where the president was traveling, and it's just before that painted strip that the limousine stops and this final shot is taken. So some people think that this was a painted strip by the CIA as like, you know, make sure it doesn't get past this area. We need to have it done by this point. There's also this random dude dressed in all black who's holding an umbrella. A lot of people seem to think that he was some sort of marker signal guy. He had some responsibility for telling them whether or not things were good. Like maybe if he put the umbrella down, then things were good. If the umbrella's still up, it's not good. I don't know. Then there's tons of photos with guys who look like they're walking around with giant radios on their back. Super weird. But for me, the proof that all of this is true is not in what happened and all the evidence to say that it happened. It's in what happened afterwards.
It's sure good to see you. How's life treating you today? Well, Saul, it's been a pretty touch and go situation. Lyndon and I have had quite a few unpleasant words here lately over the deal with that he hired Mike Wallace to assassinate the president. It's been hectic in every way, but we've lived through it this far. I guess we'll continue to do so. Lyndon should have never issued that order to Mike. But we've had our differences, and I'm a true blue to Lyndon, as I've always been, and tried to carry out every order that he'd ever given me. But this is one I'll probably never be able to forget. And the times that we've had in Texas, and the embarrassment that Lyndon had gotten from Kennedy, I guess there wasn't anything else to do but what he did.
Well, you know, Lyndon could have really hit me if he would.
Well, Lyndon's the kind of person that doesn't want to help anyone. He's all for Lyndon, and that's the way he's pretty much always been.
Well, they had me backed up on that Henry Marshall killing, and they just kind of blackmailed me to keep my mouth shut. And if I hadn't had a bunch of tapes that I'd played after he got killed, because, you know, 17 got killed in this situation very mysteriously. And I've done a lot of time, and I've lost a lot of money, and it's hurt my family a whole lot. And it's really got me just disgusted with Lyndon in one way. In one way, I feel real sorry for him.
Immediately after JFK is assassinated, Lyndon B. Johnson takes office. He reverses the NSAM 263 whole proposal for removing troops from Vietnam, and he enacts NSAM 273, which actually reinstates troops going into Vietnam, and he actually escalates things in Vietnam. And as we all know, Vietnam was a straight-up shit show. Allen Dulles, the leader of the Warren Report, completely covers everything up and makes sure that this magic bullet theory is the theory. The cover-up's going strong. The CIA, the mafia, the government moves on as per usual. They say that Lyndon Johnson got rid of anything and everything JFK related, including all photos of him from the White House, like immediately. And as we know, since we're alive right here and well, and we already know what's going on, the CIA and their covert operations and their propaganda and their Northwoods type operations, they continued. So I don't know, you guys, I'm literally physically exhausted, because when you think that you've taken in tons of JFK information, you've probably only watched or read maybe like less than 1% of what's out there. There is so much information, so many theories, so many proofs, so many stories, witness testimonies, photos, video. Like, it's just insane. My brain is mush at this point. And so I'm really glad I could bring this much info to you guys, because I feel like it's all very important to the story and understanding what got us here, what motives we had getting us here. And sometimes if you want to understand what happened in a certain situation, analyzing the evidence and proving that there was a conspiracy is only half of the battle. The other half is figuring out, like, what's the point? Why would they do this? This seems like a lot of work and a lot of crazy stress to go through. The possibility of it not even working out is pretty high. So why go through all this trouble unless they really felt like they needed to? And they really felt like they needed to because JFK threatened their war machine. He threatened their money. And only 4 presidents have been assassinated since the dawn of our nation. And all 4 of them were messing with the money. But I want to know what you guys think about this theory. If you guys have any interesting theories of your own, if there's any proofs or interesting things that you think I should know or others should know, drop it in the comments, because I love seeing what you guys have to say. I learn so much from you guys every week reading your comments. So yeah, drop it in the comments. If you like the story, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot. Please like the video. Hit the notification bell so you see all the future videos I'm going to do, because they're going to be good. I already know it. And if you haven't seen any of my old videos, go back and check them out. I'd recommend starting with the Anna Nicole Smith one A lot of the information that I talked about really came from this amazing documentary called Everything is a Rich Man's Trick. If you have 3.5 hours to watch that, 100,000% recommend it. Phenomenal video. Although I feel like the information I brought to you covers a lot of what they cover in there as well. But just want to give credit to Francis Richard Connally because his research and his theory and his ability to investigate and break down the facts, truly, truly amazing. And the documentary is worth watching. I'll link it right here. I'll link it in the description. And yeah, check it out. Because honestly, everything really is a rich man's trick. But that's all I got for you guys this week. I look forward to doing this again with you guys next week for another one. But until then, sleep safe, stay sober, and ask what you can do for the CIA. Later, sobers.
Let's go.